And back on GameDaySportsRadio.com, Bogie Wood with you, along with Mike Bernard on this Friday morning. Mike, how are you?
Doing well. I could do without the sneak preview of winter in Birmingham, but I'll be back in Vegas next week, so maybe winter will not show up in the desert.
But even if it is winter, it'll be a dry winter, right? So,
Yeah, cold is cold, right?
cold is cold. Yeah, that's what when I moved to New Mexico back in the early '90s, and it was 103 degrees, and I'm like, but it's okay, coach. It's a dry heat, and I'm like, it's hot. That's all I can tell you. It's hot. I may not be
Yep.
sweating, but I'm hot.
You
That's where
sweating, it just evaporated.
exactly. Yes. Let's uh let's talk about some of the games that we're going to be looking at tomorrow. Syracuse and Clemson. That's the ABC noon Eastern kickoff game. The knock on Syracuse is that they had not been tested. However, last week they knocked off number 15 North Carolina State 24-9. Now the Orange is sitting at 6-0, ranked number 14th, and they've got to visit number 5 Clemson. Mike, this Clemson team has new coordinators on both sides of the ball. The defense is not as good as it has been. And again, and maybe that's an unfair comparison, but they're giving up 19 points per game. But the Syracuse defense is only giving up 13 points per game. But Clemson's still a 2-touchdown favorite. I kind of look at this and say it's probably because Clemson has played an overall tougher schedule than the Orange.
Well, yeah, and plus Clemson has been higher up over the last few years competing for titles, and Syracuse didn't have many believers before the year started, and they frankly don't have a lot of believers now. You mentioned that win over NC State. Quarterback Leary was out for NC State, and again, that's not speaking as a fan; it's just a fact. And but they got the job done, and they covered in that game as well. The Tigers, you mentioned it; they're a 2-touchdown favorite. It doesn't surprise me. I don't think the Orange have been tested on the road because their only road trip was to Connecticut on September 10th. Clemson beat Florida State by 6 in Tallahassee, but Coach, it wasn't that close.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was not a close game at all. And again, I think a lot of eyes are on Clemson simply because of the change in coordinators. It's the first time in I guess, in his tenure at Clemson that Dabo's had to come into the season with two new coordinators.
Yeah, he handled the transition well, or Clemson did when Chad Morris was gone, and then Elliott, on the offensive side of the ball. But when you had Venables there for that whole stretch, you could always count on that Tiger defense.
Let's move on to an afternoon game, Eastern time. It'll be local time, a 12:30 kickoff out in Eugene, Oregon. Now, we're going to talk about this, and people are going to think that we've lost our minds, but we're talking about a top 10 matchup in the Pac 12. Chip Kelly, he's got the Bruins undefeated in his fifth year. The Ducks, their only loss is to Georgia in that opener. And this is the late. Let me gather my words here because this is so unique, or at least it has been for the last 26 seasons. This is the latest in the season that we've had a top 10 matchup consisting of two Pac 12 teams in the last 26 seasons since 1996. Now, when you look at these two teams, you've got to start off with the quarterbacks. Bo Nix at Oregon, DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson at UCLA. The teams, you look at the history, the Ducks have won the last 7 versus the Bruins in Eugene. You look at top 10 matchups in Eugene, Oregon. Oregon is 5-0 in Autzen Stadium. I think for UCLA to win, Chad Charbonnet and Jake Bobo, the receiver who transferred in from Duke, they've got to have big games.
Yeah, and we've seen this before from the Pac-12, and Washington got in the Final Four. Of course, Oregon did too. their best chance this year is going to be UCLA because Oregon, frankly, people aren't going to put that, even though it was the first game of the year, they're not going to dismiss when they got dismantled by Georgia over in Atlanta. But, Coach, what a massive upgrade for Oregon at head coach. Mario Cristobal, he can recruit. He can teach the X's and O's. His game management is some of the worst you'll see. And if you want to see coaching malpractice, watch tape of his teams at Oregon and watch his team last week, the Miami team.
Oh, you talking about when they were up like 20-7 with under 6 minutes to go, and they were snapping the ball with 22 on the play clock, and then on top of that, they were throwing the ball after snapping it with 22 seconds on the play clock. Yeah, I kind of noticed that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, most handicappers and odds makers did as well. Luckily, I didn't have a position in that game, but you have to be aware of these coaches that don't know how to end a game. Lanning, head coach now at Oregon, he gets full marks in my book through 6 games. I don't hold that Oregon that Georgia loss against him. That's just a lot of people lose to Georgia, and a lot of teams lose to Georgia badly. They got snowballed in that opener, and they also struggled at Washington State. They trailed by 12 with 3 minutes on the clock. They came back to win. Important to note there, Bo Nix, he threw a pick 6 in that game, and it was like a 90-yard pick 6. So they're going into the end zone, but he didn't hold his head. He kept his cool, and he led that comeback.
Yeah, he's done a good job leading that offense out there at Oregon. And a lot of Auburn fans, I think, kind of chuckled under their breath when Georgia handed it to Oregon in that opener in Atlanta. However, I don't think there's an Auburn fan out there that wouldn't give their left arm to have Bo Nix back right now.
Yeah. And, he's done well. And again, I was really impressed because he had a lot of pressure at Auburn with the legacy of his family and how much it meant to him. And the way he came back in that Washington State game and how he's performed is good for him. I'm not going to have a big play on this game, but it's a couple of little teaching points as far as handicapping. The point spread's around 6.5. When you have an intra-conference game, the line's around 6 or 6.5. Historically, the dog has the edge. The Bruins are unbeaten. They're ranked 10th in the polls. They're respected, but respected odds makers have Oregon ranked 10th and UCLA 20th. Okay, so UCLA doesn't have a loss, but odds makers have Oregon rated much higher. Since only scoring 3 points in that Georgia game, the Ducks have reeled off 41 or more in 5 straight games. I'm not going to have a big play on this game, but I'll certainly watch it.
Let's move on to Kansas State, TCU, Wildcats, number 17, the Horned Frogs, number 8. Chris Kleiman and Sonny Dykes, I think they are 2 of the most underrated coaches in NCAA football. I like them. I like the way they manage games. I think I could work for either one of those 2 guys. And what they've done, they have not had the silver spoon in their mouth, so to speak. They're blue collar, go to work kind of guys. And these teams are that way too. Kansas State, the 2 quarterbacks in this game, Kansas State's Adrian Martinez, a Nebraska transfer. So glad that he's getting some success there at Kansas State after those years in Nebraska where he's just right on the cusp of something great. And, of course, we all know what happened there. Max Duggan, the TCU quarterback, you're talking about someone that has dealt with adversity. During the COVID testing, they found out he had a heart issue, had to have heart surgery. He comes back. He loses his starting position this past preseason to Chandler Morris, an Oklahoma transfer that came in. But then Chandler Morris goes out in the Colorado game with an injury, and Duggan comes back in. Is not pouting. He's ready to play. And so far, 1,591 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 1 interception. So I really, I like both head coaches. I like both quarterbacks. I'm happy for those guys. And both these quarterbacks, again, they can throw the ball, but they can also make plays with their feet. When you compare these 2, I don't think that Kansas State, though, has the explosive offensive power that TCU does. But that being said, climbing teams have knocked off teams on the road consistently, and I mean top teams. Like in Iowa State and Iowa, you can say, well, those are not really top teams. If you're coaching 1AA and you take your team in and beat them at home, that's a good win for you. But just since being at Kansas State, he's gone into Starkville, Mississippi and won, and he's gone to Norman, Oklahoma and won, not once, but twice. So he knows what it takes to get a team ready to go play in a hostile environment in a big game. TCU, they should win the game, in my opinion, but they better be careful of an emotional letdown after a very big win over that undefeated Oklahoma State team last week.
Yeah, climbing's a giant killer. TCU, coach, they were down 14 in the fourth quarter to Oklahoma State. They came back to tie it in regulation, of course. They get the win in overtime. Those type of games take a lot out of a team, physically, emotionally. K-State, when you bet on K-State, you're usually getting good value because of their style of play. You know, the public wants to bet on offenses. Well, K-State's about defense, run game. Kleiman knows when, unlike Mario Cristobal, Kleiman knows when to take the air out of the ball and end the game. K-State's not your typical Big 12 team. Basically, Iowa State and K-State, they're the only two Big 12 programs that play that way.
Yeah, Kansas State, they've shown that they can win in the Big 12 with the philosophy of we're going to build around defense. Going back to Bill Snyder, even though Bill Snyder was an offensive coordinator at Iowa, when he came to Kansas State, he knew that he had to have a different philosophy. And unbelievable what he did in Manhattan, Kansas. And they tried it with Rod Prince. He comes in. He was going to overhaul the program. That didn't work out. And then they bring Snyder back in. He righted the ship a little bit. And now Kleiman is he's come in. He's picked up where Snyder has left off. And again, we always talk about fit for coaches. Chris Kleiman's a great fit for Kansas State. He's a winner. He won 4 national titles in 5 years at North Dakota State. And a lot of times when you have a 1AA or FCS coach that moves up to the FBS or Division 1A, a lot of times people say, well, their success is not going to translate and they're not going to have the same type of success. Well, again, it goes back to fit. I think a lot of times when you see 1AA coaches step up and they're not successful, it's not because that they're not a good coach. It's just because they were looking for the first big payday they could find. They took a job knowing that it wasn't a good fit. Kleiman turned down job after job after job. He waited on a job that he knew was a good fit for him, and it's this K-State job. And it is a great fit for him because look at it right now. If I'm not mistaken, he's tied for first place in the Big 12.
Okay, I just had in my ear, do not do my monologue on why Bill Snyder is the best college coach in history for the 12th time. So I won't do that. But let's say he's the most underrated coach in college football history. You can go back and watch previous things. I won't go into that. But you brought up a good point. Snyder was an offensive coordinator, but he built his program off of defense. And it's interesting because remember Brian Billick, when he had the Super Bowl champion and Ray Lewis and those great defenses, well, he was the offensive coordinator at Minnesota when they had the best offense in the league, and yet his Baltimore teams won titles with defense. So I thought that's an interesting comparison there. No doubt the Wildcats are solid. They've covered 4 straight in this series. They've covered 4 of their last 5 trips to Fort Worth. They won 3 of those outright. And K-State, they thrive in these spots. TCU coming off that emotional win. K-State comes to town. They got their lunch pail in their hand. They're facing, a team off an emotional win and a rejuvenated Adrian Martinez. I'm going to take Kansas State in the points here.
All right, let's move on to our picks of the week from last week. And forgive me again, I've forgotten what your pick was last week. Who did you have?
I had the Cougars of BYU, and it was a loss.
It was a loss. Okay, well, let's see. That would and I forgot who I had, but I had a win, correct? I think I had a
Yeah, you
win.
had LSU over Florida, and so your
LSU over
picks.
Florida. Yes, yes.
So you're
And
5-1 against the spread, 3 outright underdog wins, and I'm 4-2 against the spread on 3 picks.
okay. Well, uh
9-3, by the way, is really good by anybody's standards against the spread. So that's what
yeah,
we are combined.
yeah. We're waiting on our trophy to come in from somewhere to
Yeah, it's
give us a
this.
pat on. Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's go ahead. We'll start this week. I'll go first, and I'm going to look at Pitt at Louisville. The Panthers 4-2. The Cards 3-3. Now I know that the Panthers lost to Georgia Tech, but this is the same team that took Tennessee to overtime. The Cardinals, I look at their best win is probably against Central Florida. They did play Florida State close. I still don't know what to make of Florida State right now. I know that Louisville is favored, but I think Kendon Slovis is due a breakout game to transfer from USC. He's really not lived up to what they thought he would be at Pitt. I think he's getting more comfortable, though, and I'm looking for a breakout game. Could be in Louisville on Saturday night, but I'm going with Pitt for the upset.
Okay, Pitt against Louisville. My free pick this week: Texas A&M at South Carolina. A&M, big disappointment at 3-3. South Carolina, in my opinion, they've exceeded expectations. 4-2 overall. They've won 3 in a row. This line opened A&M -4. It was bet down to 3. This is a buy low spot for the Aggies. And I know I'm on them all the time about, underperforming, but they're 8-0 versus South Carolina. And they're coming off that bye week. I think that's going to help them heal up. I never bought into the Aggies preseason hype and all the hyperbole, but this looks like a good spot for them. I'm going to play A&M -3.
One thing about South Carolina, Shane Beamer's got this team playing loose and with a lot of confidence right now. They went into Lexington when a lot of people didn't give them much chance to go in and win there. But I thought that, again, I was impressed with their performance up in Lexington. And so, again, I think this will be a great game to watch. It's, again, watching Texas A&M plays like a soap opera. You just don't know what you're going to get from day to day.
Yeah, and when I'm playing, I had Texas A&M the under in the Texas A&M App State game. I had A&M against Alabama. So anytime I get a good read on a team going on or against, I like that. This looks like a good spot for them. I really don't want to lay 3, but since it went from 4 to 3, and the respected money got it down to 3, so I'm going against some respected money. But remember, respected money doesn't always win, and square plays don't always lose.
All right, Mike, we'll talk again on Sunday morning, or bright and early on the Sunday morning blitz, and we'll go back over and we'll see how well we did.
Yep, and I doubt very seriously that we'll be able to recap a lot of outstanding games like we did last Sunday, because
Yeah.
those type of Saturdays don't come that often.
No, they really don't. That was a unique weekend in college football last week, and you really have to savor those type weekends. And frankly, even on some of the other shows I've been on across the nation, we've struggled to really find a lot of good games to talk about this week.
Well, maybe Sunday we'll talk about how A&M blew out South Carolina and Pitt upset the Cardinals.
There you go. We can do that. Mike Bernard from OTM Sports. We'll be right back on GameDaySportsRadio.com.